Hello, students. We're going to start working with percents, and we're going to use a bar model to understand what percents mean and how they compare to other numbers. So let's look at number one. One bar is 100%. What percent is represented here? Write your answer as a decimal and a fraction. So you could see this purple bar here represents 100%. So we're going to use that as our reference point. I'm now looking at the gray bar, and our job is to figure out what percent is represented here. So I'm noticing that it's not 100%. I know it's less than 100%. I think when I use a 50% or 1/2, that might give me a better idea. When I divide that bar into 50%, I can see that the gray bar is even more than that. So I know that it's more than 50%. If I break 50% up again in half, that's another 25%, which would represent 75%. And just on the other side to balance it out, I have 25%. So if I'm looking at that bar, I have 0% all the way to 100% represented on that purple bar. And as I'm looking at the gray bar and I outline it, it looks to be about 75%. But the directions did tell me to write it as a decimal and a fraction. We learned that 75% as a decimal is 0.75, and as a fraction, 75 over 100. And for today, I am not going to simplify so that we can easily see our percentage, our fraction, and our decimal. Let's move on to number 2. One bar is 100%. What percent is written here? So I'm noticing that our gray bar is much smaller this time. I'm going to use the 50% mark to give me a better idea. Still, it's much smaller than that. So I decided I'm going to break up that 50% into 5 equal pieces, which would be 10% each. So as you can see here, I have 0% all the way to 50%. As I'm looking at that gray bar, it seems to match up very well with the 10%. So I would say that our gray bar is represented as about 10%. Written as a decimal, 0.10 or 0.1, or we'd also say 1/10, which brings us to our fraction. 10 out of 100. And I want you to see here, it does simplify to 1/10, which we saw in our decimal form. So we can really easily see that connection here. Number 3, we have that purple bar that represents 100%, and then we have 2 gray bars. So I notice that there's one gray bar that's exactly equal to the purple. So that must be 100%. So this is more than 100%. I'm looking at that second gray bar, and I'm going to compare it to 50%. Looks like that second gray bar is about 50%, or half of the 100. So to find the total here, we're going to add these together. 100% plus 50% is 150%. That would be like getting extra credit on a test or something like that. As a decimal, I move the decimal place over 2 places left, or divide it by 100, which is 1 5/10, or you could say 1 50/100, which also leads us to our fraction, 1 5/10, which simplifies to 1 1/2. These are fractions and decimals that we should be pretty familiar with by now. Now we're going to use the bar model to help us figure out how percents relate to other numbers. How can you use the bar model to find 25% of 80? So that's our problem. 25% of 80. First, I want to think about how is 25% related to 100%? Well, I know that 25 times 4 is 100. So if I do 100% divided by 25%, I get 4. That means I can divide this bar up into 4 equal pieces. Now I know that each bar is 25%. And we know we're looking for 25%. So I'm going to shade in what I'm looking for. So I still need to relate it back to the 80. Well, I took the bar and I divided it into 4 pieces. Now for this problem, the 80 is 100% of the bar. So I'm going to also divide 80 by 4 and divide that into equal pieces, which I see is 20. Let's see how that relates to the bar model. We have 0, and then we have 20, 40, 60, 80. So 100% of the bar is 80. And let's take a look if we have our answer. 25% of the bar is 20. We can then conclude that 25% of 80 is 20. Let's move on to number 5. Now this one is a similar situation, but we're going to do it 2 different times. How can you use the bar model to find 20% of 60 or 70% of 60? So as I'm looking at my 100%, I'm going to look at the 20% of 60 first. Now I'm thinking about 20% and relating it to the 100%. I'm not so good at it, but I'm going to do the 10%. I know that there's 10% in 100%. So I'm going to divide the bar into 10 equal pieces. So we're going to have 0%, 10%, 20, and so on. All the way up to 100%. And for this problem, the 100% is the 60. So I start at 0, and my 100% is 60. All right, well, let's think about what we just did. We did 100% divided by 10 is 10%. So I'm going to divide the 60 into 10 pieces as well. And that equals 6. That means that there's 10 sixes inside 60. Let's go back to the original question. What is 20% of 60? Here's 10%. Here's 20%. If you look at our bar, 12. We can conclude that 20% of 60 is 12. Now there was a second part of this question. We're going to look at what is 70% of 60. Well, we already divided up the whole bar into 10 pieces. And I know that 70% divided by 10 is 7. So I need 7 of those boxes to make 70%, or I can just look at the model. Here's 70% right here. I box that in. I can even shade the pink. It's kind of a lot. It's more than 50%. 70% of 60 is 42. So once you divide that bar into 10 pieces or 10%, it's really easy to find those other whole numbers. Now for number 6, we're going to try not to use the bar model. We're going to try to use some mathematics and figure it out that way. So I'm looking at number 6, and it says, find 35% of 80. 35% of 80. So if I'm thinking about what I know that the 100% is 80, and I'm trying to find 35% of it. Let's think about what we know. We know percents can be written as decimals, so I'm going to start with that. 35% written as a decimal is 0.35. If I'm trying to find what that represents from 80, I can multiply by 80. When I use my calculator to help me do that, I get that 35% of 80 is 28. And then you are done. So based on what we understand from those bar models, we can kind of skip some steps and use the mathematical expression to help us understand that. Lastly, we're going to look at number 7. Find 30% of 78 using a mathematical expression. I'm going to show you 2 different ways. 30% of 78. Let's do the method we just learned. I can turn 30% into a decimal, and that'll be 0.3 or 0.30 times 78. Well, if I use my calculator again to do something like this, I'm getting a decimal of 23.4. And that's it. We're done. Now, one trick I absolutely love to do, especially when I'm out to dinner and I'm trying to leave a tip for somebody, is using the 10% rule. So 30% of 78. Same problem, we're just going to solve it in a different way. I'm going to use like a little thought bubble here because this is what I'm doing mentally. I can find 10% first. Based on what we know about place value, is we know moving the decimal place over 1 is 10%. So here's my 78. Technically, there is a decimal at the end. We just don't typically write it. I could even write it as 78.0. And then all I do is move the decimal place over 1 space. That represents 10%. So 7.8 is 10% of 78. But I don't want 10%, I want 30%. Well, I can use that 3 times because 3 10% is 30%. So I'm going to do 7.8 times 3. I can use my calculator for that as well, but I should be getting that same answer that I got with the other method, and I sure did. 23.4. Again, and if I wasn't super clear about it, the reason I multiplied by 3 is because I only found 10% and I actually needed 30%. So if I do 10% times 3, then I would get 30%. Good luck today. You guys are doing great.